Daniel Hart never thought his life would become a crime story people whispered about over dinner. He was just a man, an ordinary man, really. 36, civil engineer, conservative in his ways, reliable, a little stubborn, maybe too strict with himself and others. He wore his masculinity like a uniform. Pressed slacks, tucked-in shirts, beard trimmed every Sunday, and a belief that life made sense when you follow the rules. He married Serena because she made sense, too. She was everything he thought a woman should be. Soft-spoken, loyal, caring, attentive. She laughed at his dry jokes, made his lunch every morning, and never missed a chance to say, "I love you," before bed. She was a nurse, highly trained, surgical ward, smart enough to impress him, but never tried to outshine him. They seemed like the perfect suburban couple. 7 years of marriage, no kids, one mortgage, 2 cars, a dog named Baxter. But something had shifted in the past year. Daniel couldn't put his finger on it at first. There were the headaches. Then came the chronic fatigue. Night sweats. Mood swings that didn't feel like his. His appetite dropped. His muscle tone softened. He chalked it up to stress, overwork, maybe his age finally catching up with him. Serena urged him to see a doctor, but Daniel resisted. He didn't like hospitals unless he was building them. Then the pain started, sharp, persistent, low in his abdomen. Some nights he woke up clutching his gut like it was trying to turn itself inside out. Serena looked genuinely worried. She'd sit at the edge of the bed and stroke his forehead while whispering, "You need help, baby." Eventually, she told him she found a private clinic, Ikita's Wellness Institute, known for its advanced diagnostics and holistic healing methods. "It's discreet," she said. "No insurance involved. No records. You'll be in and out." Daniel hesitated. Something about that didn't sit right with him. But the pain was unbearable, and Serena had already made the appointment. He remembers walking into the facility on a rainy Wednesday morning. The place was pristine, white walls, dim blue lights, the scent of lavender and antiseptic. The receptionist was oddly robotic, all smiles, but no warmth. Daniel filled out a few forms, but everything was electronic, fast. Serena handled most of it. She kissed his forehead and said, "You'll thank me after this." The last thing he remembered was lying on the hospital bed with a mask over his face, nurses murmuring something about sedatives, and Serena standing over him with this soft, almost reverent expression. Then darkness. When Daniel woke up, he wasn't sure what day it was. He wasn't even sure who he was. The room was quiet, cold, sterile. His throat was sore. His limbs felt like lead. He tried to move, but something wasn't right. He looked down and saw bandages across his lower stomach and between his legs, and 4 ran into his arm. His chest was tight like it was strapped down. He couldn't speak. His tongue felt like cotton. Then he saw her, Serena, sitting at the far corner of the room, reading a magazine like nothing had happened. When she noticed he was awake, she put the magazine down and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a guilty one, a smile like she had just finished baking a cake. "You're okay," she said softly, walking toward him. "You made it." He tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry croak. "Don't strain yourself," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "You've been asleep for a few days." But everything went perfectly. He blinked slowly. "Days? What happened?" he managed to whisper. Serena's smile widened. "You had surgery, baby. But don't worry. You're going to feel so much better now. No more pain. No more confusion." Confusion? Daniel's heart thudded. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. He struggled to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. His hands were trembling. When he looked at them, they seemed smaller, softer. His eyes darted to the tray beside the bed. A mirror. He reached for it. Serena snatched it away before he could grab it. "Not yet," she said. "You're not ready." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "What did you do to me?" She leaned in, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I saved you." He screamed, or tried to. It came out broken, hoarse, like a dying animal. He reached under the sheets, clawing at the bandages between his legs. And then he felt it. Or rather, he didn't. The absence. The void. His entire body recoiled in horror. Serena held him down, calm, gentle, like a mother soothing a child mid-nightmare. "You've always hated your body," she said. "I just gave you what you were too afraid to ask for." He shook his head violently, tears stinging his eyes. "No, no, I never said." "Yes, you did," she interrupted. "I have the recordings, the documents. You gave consent." He stared at her, jaw trembling. "What documents?" She pulled out a tablet, opened a file, and played a voice recording. "I hate looking at myself. I wish I could start over. Be someone else. I want to be free." It was his voice, his tone, but twisted, off. It wasn't him. It wasn't him. Daniel's world collapsed inward as Serena pulled the blanket up to his chest and whispered, "You're free now, Danny." And in that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't healing. This was betrayal wearing a surgical mask. This wasn't love. This was mutilation disguised as mercy. And the woman he had trusted more than anyone else on earth had just destroyed the man he used to be. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt phantom pain, like something had been carved from his body and replaced with silence. His skin prickled. His mind screamed. But his voice, his real voice, was gone, buried beneath medication and disbelief. Serena stayed by his side, humming softly as she flipped through pages of a medical binder, as if she were reading a cookbook. Occasionally, she reached over to check his vitals, caress his forehead, or whisper affirmations like, "You're going to feel whole now." Whole? He tried again to sit up, muscles shaking with weakness and rage. But even his anger felt distant, muffled, like he'd been trapped inside someone else's body. And in a way, he had. By morning, a man in a white lab coat entered the room. He was tall, early 50s, clean-shaven with a calculated smile and a clipboard in hand. His name tag read, Dr. Adrian Wells, Gender Realignment Specialist. "Good morning, Danny," the doctor said. "How are we feeling?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes darted toward Serena, who simply nodded toward the doctor as if to say, "Go on. Explain it to him." Dr. Wells pulled up a chair. "I know this is a confusing time," he said gently, "but you made a courageous choice. Gender dysphoria can be a silent killer. You lived too long in conflict with your true identity. What you did was brave." "I didn't do anything," Daniel rasped. "I didn't ask for this." Dr. Wells flipped the clipboard and showed him a document with a shaky signature at the bottom. "This is the consent form. You signed it." Daniel stared at the paper. That was his name, but not his handwriting. His stomach churned. "That's not mine." It was notarized, with ID and voice verification. The doctor said calmly. Serena stepped closer. "You were just scared, Daniel. You said it all the time. You hated yourself. You used to cry in the shower when you thought I wasn't watching." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I cried because I was in pain. From the stomach issues. From stress." "You cried," Serena said, her voice tightening, "because you were living a lie." He looked at her, and for the first time in 7 years, she didn't look like his wife. She looked like a stranger who had stolen his skin and stitched him into a costume. "I want to leave," he said. "Discharge me now." Dr. Wells hesitated. "Unfortunately, due to the nature of post-operative recovery and psychological stabilization, you're under a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric observation." "You mean you're holding me hostage?" Serena squeezed his hand. "No one's holding you. We're just giving you time to adjust." Daniel yanked his hand away. "You drugged me. You forged my name. You cut me open." Serena blinked, the mask of compassion cracking slightly. "I fixed you." That word echoed in his skull like a gunshot. Fixed. The next few days passed in a blur of morphine, locked doors, and mandatory therapy sessions with a soft voice counselor named Veda, who insisted on referring to him as she. No matter how many times Daniel corrected her, she smiled and wrote something in her notepad like he was a confused patient, not a man screaming for his life back. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether. On day 5, Serena wheeled in a suitcase filled with women's clothing, sundresses, lace bras, sandals, a wig. "I picked out things that match your new figure," she beamed. "You're healing beautifully." Daniel stared at the floral dress draped over the edge of the bed like it was a dead animal. "I'm not wearing that." "You will. Eventually." "Why are you doing this to me?" Serena sat down, folding her hands in her lap like she was about to pray. Because I love you. No, he said quietly. You love owning me. Serena's face stiffened. You were wasting your life, pretending to be someone you weren't. You said you want to change. I just made it real. Daniel gritted his teeth. You made you real. You erased me. Later that night, a nurse came in to change his bandages. Her name was Camille, mid-30s, Haitian accent, kind eyes. She worked quickly and in silence, until Daniel whispered, Please help me. Camille glanced at the hallway and lowered her voice. I believe you, she said. You're not the first. Daniel's breath caught. What do you mean? Camille leaned closer. This clinic, it's not what it seems. Some of these patients, they never signed anything. Someone pays a lot of money to erase their past. Serena? Camille didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said everything. I need to get out, Daniel whispered. Camille hesitated. I'll try, but if they catch you, I'll die here. That night, Camille left his room unlocked. Daniel waited until 3 a.m. when the halls were quiet. He tore the 4 from his arm, grabbed the tablet Serena left behind, and limped barefoot through the corridor, holding his gown closed. He made it to the stairwell. Alarms didn't go off, but someone was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't security. It was Serena, still in her scrubs, holding a cup of decaf. You really thought you could run? She said softly. Daniel backed away slowly, heart hammering. You don't own me, he said. Serena stepped closer, eyes shining with something feral and broken. I created you. And then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a syringe. Daniel turned and ran. He didn't know how, but he made it outside, into the woods behind the clinic, into the freezing night air, into the darkness. He didn't stop until his lungs gave out. He collapsed beneath a pine tree, bleeding, shaking, but alive. The next morning, someone found him on the side of Highway 42. Hypothermic, delirious, dressed in a hospital gown, soaked with blood. He was admitted to a different hospital, one with real doctors, real law enforcement. But by the time the authorities went to Ikita's Wellness Institute, it was gone, stripped, abandoned, like it had never existed. Just like Daniel. When Daniel opened his eyes again, it was to fluorescent lights, the sound of heart monitors, and a uniformed police officer stationed outside his hospital door. A real hospital this time. University of Kentucky Medical Center. Clean, crowded, loud, alive. His first instinct was to scream. The memories rushed in like a flood. Serena's syringe, the escape, the pine trees, the bleeding. But then a nurse appeared, young, pale, startled by his panic, and gently whispered, You're safe now. Safe. The word barely meant anything anymore. They ran every test imaginable. A psychologist came, then a trauma counselor, then a detective from the Louisville Police Department named Detective Marla Kingsley. Tough, skeptical, early 40s, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at horror stories. But even she blinked when Daniel told her what had been done to him. You're saying your wife arranged gender reassignment surgery without your consent? Yes. Do you have any proof? I had a voice, a body. Now I have neither. Kingsley scribbled something in her notebook. Daniel sat up in bed, tugging at the hem of the hospital gown. She drugged me. She made deepfake audio to fake my consent. There was a clinic, Ikita's Wellness, out in the woods. But when you get there, it's gone. Kingsley gave a slow nod. We're looking into it. But there's no record of any clinic by that name. Not in the state. Not licensed. Not leased. No tax ID. Nothing. Daniel clenched his fists. It was real. There were doctors. Nurses. Serena brought me there. We're checking her financials, her phone records, but so far, everything's clean. Then she's hiding it better than you think. 3 days later, Daniel got a call from his attorney. His bank account had been frozen. Joint account with Serena. All assets transferred. Mortgage refinanced. Even his name on the deed gone. What do you mean gone? I mean legally, Daniel Hart no longer exists. What? There's a court file, sealed, petitioning for name change. Gender reassignment. Guardianship due to mental instability. And it's all dated before the surgery. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. She's been planning this for months, he said. Maybe years. The next blow came from social media. Somehow, someone had leaked videos, clips, voice recordings. They were edited, spliced together, featuring Daniel's voice saying things like, "I've always wanted to be free. My wife understands me better than anyone. I'm not Daniel. I'm Danny." It went viral on TikTok and Reddit within 24 hours. The internet called it the bravest love story of the year. Daniel watched strangers praise Serena's devotion in the comments, calling her a hero for helping her husband live authentically. They posted fan art, trans flags, couples edits, think pieces. He was being erased in real time. He reached out to news outlets, begging for someone to hear the truth. But every reporter already had a narrative. Serena Hart, the angelic nurse who helped her closeted husband transition. Beautiful, empowered, progressive. And Daniel? He was just a mentally unstable man ashamed of his new life. A disgraced TikTok user. An ungrateful tranny in some corners of the internet. It didn't matter that he never wanted this. The world had already decided. But Detective Kingsley didn't give up. "I believe you," she said one night, her voice low. "Something about this stinks." "What changed your mind?" Daniel asked. Kingsley handed him a photo. It was grainy surveillance footage from a highway toll booth 2 days before his surgery. It showed Serena driving a black SUV, and in the passenger seat, slumped over and unconscious, was Daniel. She showed him another image, an invoice from a chemical supplier. Heavy sedatives, purchased under a fake business name linked to an offshore account. Then came the kicker, a partial transcript of a text conversation between Serena and an anonymous contact. "Serena, it has to look like he wanted it. Unknown. He won't fight if he's unconscious. Serena, by the time he wakes up, he'll thank me." That was enough for a warrant. But by the time police raided Serena's home, she was gone. Everything gone. Laptop wiped. Hard drive shattered. Photos removed from the walls. Neighbors said they saw her leave 2 days earlier in scrubs. No luggage, just her purse and a dog carrier. Detective Kingsley turned to Daniel. "She knew we were coming." Daniel stared at the empty walls of the woman who used to share his bed. The woman who smiled at him while feeding him poisoned soup. The woman who once cried in his arms and whispered, "I could never hurt you." He asked the question that had haunted him since he woke up on that operating table. "Why me?" Kingsley looked at him, then at the evidence, and said, "We don't think you were the first." Over the next few weeks, Daniel learned the full scope of the horror. 2 other names surfaced, men who had vanished after routine medical procedures under Serena's supervision. One of them, a closeted Army vet whose sister claimed he'd started dating Serena briefly before disappearing. The other, a man who filed a police report 2 years ago, saying his girlfriend drugged him and tried to castrate him. But the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Both men were now missing, presumed dead, or worse, recreated. A pattern began to emerge. Serena wasn't a wife. She was a sculptor. And Daniel? He was her most perfect creation. For now, Daniel became obsessed. Not in the way people binge a true crime podcast or fall into a YouTube rabbit hole. No, this was survival. This was a man chasing the ghost of himself, hunting for the woman who carved him out and left him hollow. Detective Kingsley tried to warn him. "Let's handle it. She's dangerous." But Daniel didn't trust anyone anymore. Not the law, not the media, and definitely not the system that let Serena walk away with his name, his assets, and his identity. So he did what the system wouldn't. He went looking. It started with the burner phone Serena had accidentally left in her old car, abandoned in a downtown parking garage. Daniel managed to unlock it using her birth date. Inside were hundreds of deleted texts, partially recovered through a data recovery tool Detective Kingsley quietly passed him off the record. Most of the messages were encrypted or fragmented, but a few stuck out. Conversations with someone named Dr. Kale, mentioning shipments of untraceable HRT, non-FDA surgical kits, and references to a Unit 3 somewhere in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Haiti. It sounded absurd at first. Why would an American nurse be operating out of an off-the-grid surgical site in one of the poorest nations on Earth? But the deeper Daniel dug, the more it made sense. No regulations. No oversight. A place where medical ethics meant nothing if the price was right. And Serena had always talked about getting away someday. How American healthcare was limiting her potential. A week later, Daniel boarded a plane under a fake name. He'd learned fast. With the help of a sympathetic trans rights journalist named Mika, who had been secretly following his story for a podcast, he arrived in Port-au-Prince with a cheap burner phone, $2,000 in cash, and one photograph. Serena smiling in scrubs, standing in front of a nondescript white building with a rusted metal gate. Mika knew someone. Her cousin worked with a local fixer, a man named Josue. For the right amount of money and no questions asked, Josue agreed to take them to the clinics Americans don't talk about. They drove for hours into the rural outskirts, where asphalt turned to dust and the air smelled like iron and heat. Finally, Josue stopped in front of a walled compound guarded by men with rifles and surgical masks. "This is it," Josue said, keeping the engine running. "You go in, I don't follow." Mika stayed behind with him. Daniel got out alone. He was frisked, then led inside. The place was half clinic, half laboratory. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was heavy with disinfectant and something so like metal and rot. Hallways lined with faded anatomy posters and old surgical tools. He passed a room with a woman lying unconscious, tubes snaking from her body into machines he didn't recognize. A man in a white coat waited for him at the end of the hallway. "You must be Danny," the man said, in a clipped French accent. "She said you might come looking." Daniel's blood went cold. "She's here." The man smiled. She was. He led Daniel into a back room. Inside was a wall covered with Polaroids, dozens of them, men and women, some mid-surgery, some posing post-op, all labeled with first names and dates. At the center of it all, Serena, arms around her patients, smiling like a proud mother, or a mad scientist. "You don't understand," the man said. She wasn't just altering bodies. She was creating clarity. Daniel stepped back. "You mutilated people. We set them free. Where is she?" The doctor shook his head. "She left 2 nights ago. Said her work was complete. But she left something for you." He handed Daniel a package. Inside was a black USB drive. Back at the motel, Daniel plugged it into Mika's laptop. It contained a single video file. "My confession for Danny." He hit play. Serena's face filled the screen. She was sitting in a room with bare walls, no makeup, hair pulled back, wearing the same surgical scrubs from the photo. "I know you're watching this," she said softly, "and I know you're angry. But I need you to understand something, Danny. This was never about hurting you." She leaned forward. "It was about becoming one. The world divided us into man and woman, husband and wife. Roles, expectations. But I saw something in you, something broken, screaming to be let out. And I gave it for him." Daniel's hands were trembling. "You'll never go back to who you were. That person is dead. But this person, this version of you, I created her with love." Her voice cracked. "I just hope someday you'll forgive me." The screen went black. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. Mika finally whispered, "We need to expose this." He nodded. They uploaded the footage, along with the photos, the documents, the coordinates of the compound. Within 48 hours, the story broke nationwide. Nurse who secretly transformed husband into woman tied to black market clinic in Haiti. The internet exploded. This time, Daniel controlled the narrative. He did interviews, face obscured, voice altered. He told his story, not as a trans person, not as an anti-trans mouthpiece, but as a victim of medical assault, identity theft, and psychological abuse. More victims came forward. Interpol launched an investigation into the clinic network. Several staff were arrested. The compound was torched days later. By whom? No one knows. But Serena was still gone. Vanished again. Like smoke. Like a dream you wake up from, gasping, heart pounding, unsure if it really happened. But Daniel knew. He had the scars to prove it. Inside the hard drive recovered from the clinic fire was a folder labeled Phase 2, Womb Trials. Mika opened it, expecting more surgical logs or hormone protocols. But what they found made both of them recoil. Blueprints, synthetic embryo designs, anatomical diagrams of uterus implants into biologically male bodies. At the top of one document was a name. Subject, D. Heart, primary viable carrier. Ellis went pale. She was going to... Mika interrupted, voice hollow. She was going to get you pregnant. The files outlined an experimental plan. Implant a lab-grown uterus retrofitted into Ellis's new pelvic cavity. Introduce a modified embryo using a donor egg and synthesized sperm. Carry the fetus to term in a pressurized synthetic womb. Monitor hormonal changes in an environment of psychological containment. At the bottom of the page, a note scrawled in Serena's handwriting. True rebirth cannot come from surgery alone. It must be complete. He will deliver the future with his own body. This is not about gender. This is Genesis. Ellis slammed the laptop shut and stumbled outside, vomiting into the dirt. He'd known Serena was dangerous. He didn't know she was trying to rebuild humanity from his ruined flesh. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every part of his body felt alien again. And the worst part? For just 1 second, one horrifying second, he wondered if the implant was already inside him. The trial was never supposed to happen. Not without Serena. Not without the woman who orchestrated one of the most disturbing cases of non-consensual medical transformation in American history. But then, 8 months after Daniel released the video, she walked into an embassy in Morocco. Alone, calm, wearing a long beige coat and sunglasses, and turned herself in. No explanation, no lawyers, no tears, just 5 words. Tell him I'm ready now. The U.S. extradited her within a week. And suddenly, the case of a nurse who rebuilt her husband exploded again. Only this time, Serena Hart had a face, a voice, and a courtroom. Daniel sat in the back row during her first arraignment, his body trembling beneath a tailored suit that still didn't feel like it fit. Not because of the tailoring, because he still didn't know who or what he was anymore. When Serena entered in cuffs, she looked at him. She smiled, like they were old friends meeting for brunch. The judge denied her bail. The prosecutors charged her with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, identity theft, medical fraud, human trafficking, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, unlawful practice of medicine, sexual mutilation, and then came the hardest charge of all, spousal rape, because what Serena did wasn't just medical. She lived with him, touched him, loved him, under false pretenses under a plan that rewrote Daniel's body against his will. Her defense team tried to spin the narrative. They called her a visionary, a misunderstood empath, a reformer of identity. They claimed Daniel had years of internalized gender dysphoria, that his anger was rooted in shame, that Serena merely facilitated a transition he was too afraid to undertake. The jury didn't buy it, especially not after hearing from Elias Moore, the Army vet Serena had dated 5 years earlier, who had vanished after reporting a drugging incident and later turned up living in Costa Rica under a different name and identity. He testified via video. I woke up in her bathtub, Elias said. My pants were gone. There were stitches on my inner thighs. I didn't know what she took. I still don't. Then came Dr. Kale, arrested in Haiti, who cut a deal for a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. He described in graphic detail how Serena provided forged consent forms, how she scouted ideal subjects in abusive relationships or mental distress, and how she referred to Daniel not as her husband, but as her canvas. The prosecution called her methods surgical sadism. Daniel was the final witness. The courtroom went silent when he took the stand. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply said, she didn't want to marry a woman. She wanted to make one. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the world listened. The trial lasted 3 weeks. On the final day, Serena chose to testify in her own defense. She wore a gray suit and no makeup. She looked straight at the jury and said, some people build houses. I build truth. When asked if she believed Daniel had ever truly consented, she responded, consent is a door most people are too afraid to walk through. I just opened it for him. The room fell silent. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 112 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole. But the story didn't end there. Serena's case lit a firestorm across the country. Debates erupted online about bodily autonomy, medical consent, gender identity, mental illness, and whether love could ever justify manipulation. Some fringe activists still defended her, claimed she was a martyr for gender liberation. But most people saw her for what she was. A predator in scrubs. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't post on social media. He moved to Oregon, changed his name again, and tried to start over. But starting over meant something different now. Because the surgery was irreversible. His voice had changed. His body still bled once a month from hormone complications. He couldn't walk past a mirror without pausing, half curious, half terrified of what he'd see. He didn't know if he'd ever feel real again. But he knew one thing. He survived. And Serena? Serena was finally locked behind walls. No scalpels. No syringes. No masks. Just time. Lots and lots of time. In her sentencing statement, the judge said, "Love without consent is not love. It is violence, wearing the skin of devotion." Daniel never visited her in prison, but she sent him letters, one every month. Each one ended with the same words. "I still see her in you." He burned them all. There are parts of Daniel that never grew back. Not the voice. They gave him vocal therapy, pitch correction surgery, hormone blockers. But his voice was never just about tone. It was about authority, belief, ownership. And he didn't own this body. Not anymore. The scars faded. Eventually, the swelling, the phantom pain, the constant infections, those became manageable. What didn't fade was the doubt. The lingering sense that he was now a story, a cautionary tale passed around Reddit threads and podcasts, like some urban legend with a medical twist. He moved twice in the first year after the trial. First to Oregon, then to a small town in Montana. There were no mirrors in his house. He smashed the one in the bathroom on day 3, covered the others with sheets. His name was Ellis now. No one called him Danny. And if they asked about his past, he said very little. "I survived someone who thought love meant control," he once told his therapist. "She didn't kill me. She just rewrote me." Some nights, he would wake up sweating, unsure if the entire thing had been a coma dream. He'd check between his legs, just to confirm it hadn't somehow gone back. It never did. On the outside, people thought he was strong. He'd spoken at consent conferences, gave TEDx talks about medical ethics, became the accidental face of a new federal bill requiring multi-layered verification for gender-affirming surgeries. They called it Ellis's Law. He hated it. He never asked to be anyone's symbol. He wasn't brave. He was broken in public. But the world wanted heroes. So he gave him one. And when the cameras turned off, he sat in the dark and stared at the wall. One day, 2 years after the verdict, a woman knocked on his door. She introduced herself as Liza Monroe, a documentary filmmaker. She'd been following the story from the beginning and wanted to do a piece, not about Serena, but about him. Not about the surgery, but about what came after. He said no. She sent him a handwritten letter anyway. Inside, she wrote, "You don't have to be okay. You just have to be real. That's what people need to see." He didn't respond, but he kept the letter. Weeks passed, then months, and then, out of nowhere, he found himself in a grocery store, holding a head of lettuce, overhearing a man say to his partner, "You can't just force someone to become what you need them to be." Something cracked open. He emailed Liza the next morning. The documentary, after her, premiered 18 months later. It wasn't flashy. No reenactments. No music swells. Just Ellis, barefaced, tired, honest, sitting in a wooden chair in a barn he'd converted into a workshop, telling his story in his own words. The film ended with him building a chair. Quiet. Focused. "Some people heal by forgetting," he said. "I heal by making something new." When the credits rolled, the screen faded to black and displayed one sentence. Ellis Hart was never the person Serena claimed he was, and never will be again. It went viral again. Of course it did. But this time he didn't hide. He started doing community work with trauma survivors, spoke at group therapy sessions, helped launch a national database to prevent identity-forged medical consent. He even testified in Congress. But he always left out one part. The part where, late at night, when the air was still and the pain quieted, he sometimes felt her. Not Serena. The version of himself she had created. The one with softer hands, thinner arms, different curves. The body he never asked for. She was still there, like a ghost. Not haunting him, just watching. And sometimes, only sometimes, he didn't hate her. Because she was a reminder that no one could erase him without his permission. Not even someone who once said, "I do." So he stayed Ellis. Not to erase Daniel, but to bury Serena. And to start again, not as a canvas, but as the painter. But the world wasn't ready to let him go. A month after the documentary After Her went viral, Ellis received a call from Dayline America, one of the most watched morning shows in the country. They wanted an exclusive sit-down interview, not about the surgery they promised, but about hope, survival, and identity. Mika warned him not to go. "They'll twist it," she said. "They'll make you say things you don't believe." But Ellis was tired of hiding. He thought maybe, just maybe, if he spoke, it would finally close the loop. He was wrong. The studio lights were hot. The makeup team caked powder on his cheeks. The producer told him to smile more. When the cameras rolled, the host, a bright-eyed woman with a sympathetic smile, leaned in like they were best friends at brunch. "We're here with Ellis Hart," she said to the nation, "a survivor, an advocate, and to many, a symbol of what it means to be brave and transgender in today's world." Ellis blinked. Transgender? He cleared his throat. "I didn't transition," he said carefully. "I was altered, against my will." The host nodded, condescendingly. "But don't you think some part of you wanted this? Maybe subconsciously?" "No," he said, sharper now. "This wasn't gender discovery. It was medical assault. But you've chosen to live as Ellis. That's a female name, isn't it?" His jaw clenched. "I didn't choose to live as Ellis. I chose to live." Silence. The host looked at her cue cards, clearly shaken. Then she smiled again and said, "Well, whatever the path, male or female, what matters is your whole now." That was it. Ellis stood up, pulled off the mic, looked straight into the lens, and said, "I'm not your metaphor." Then he walked off set. The segment aired anyway, but heavily edited. They cut his refusal. They cut his pain. They cut the truth. Instead, they ended the piece with soft piano music and the tagline, "From tragedy to transformation, the courage of Ellis Hart." A year after Her aired, Ellis received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was him before. Daniel Hart. Broad shoulders. Square jaw. A man who used to believe the world could be solved with logic and blueprints. On the back of the photo, scrawled in ink, was a single line. "You'll never be whole without both versions." No signature. No clues. Just silence. It rattled him. He hadn't seen that version of himself in so long. He almost forgot what it felt like to walk into a room and not be questioned, internally or externally. Not wondered about. Not whispered about. Just be. He showed the letter to no one. Burned it the next night. But the feeling stayed. Like someone was pulling at the seams of the life he was trying to stitch back together. And then, it happened again. At a conference in Chicago on medical consent reform, Ellis was approached by a woman named Carmen Rhodes, a former ICU nurse from New Mexico. "I think you need to see something," she said, passing him a tablet. It was security footage, grainy, dated 4 weeks earlier, shot in a surgical warehouse near Tijuana. In the footage, Serena Hart, alive, working, smiling. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a woman, tall, athletic, shaved head, who looked eerily familiar. Carmen zoomed in. It was the woman Serena had turned Elias into. The Army vet. Ellis stepped back from the tablet. "No," he whispered. "He escaped. He testified." Carmen shook her head. "That wasn't Elias. That was someone else." She used Elias's name, yes, but the body? She tapped the screen. "That's a replica." Ellis felt his throat tighten. Replica. As if this had never been about one man. As if Serena hadn't stopped. As if he'd never truly been her final piece. The warehouse was raided days later. Empty. Surgical tables still warm. A wall of faces, photos of patients mid-operation. Some alive, some not. And at the center, just like last time, Serena, smiling. Only now, she wasn't sculpting new versions of old lovers. She was cloning identities, creating hybrids, a mix of real and imagined, masculine and feminine, past and future. It wasn't gender to her. It was God complex. Ellis stood in that warehouse, breathing in the chemical rot, and realized she was never gone. She had evolved. Interpol reopened the case. Serena was now considered an international fugitive operating a rogue surgical cult under various aliases. Dr. Dasha, Nurse Hallie, Mother Vireo. Reports surfaced from Thailand, then Berlin, then Lagos. Victims told similar stories. They trusted her. They blacked out. They woke up someone else. Ellis was pulled back into the media storm, but this time not as a victim. This time, he was a hunter. He began tracking the pattern. Surgical supply routes, plastic surgeon disappearances, identity fraud spikes in fringe gender clinics. With Mika's help and funding from a new advocacy network, Ellis launched a digital archive called The Heartline, a living database of Serena's movements, victims, aliases, and medical forgeries. It spread like wildfire. Survivors came forward. One was a 22-year-old from Tulsa who had woken up with a reconstructed face and breasts that weren't hers. Another, a man from Romania who claimed Serena harvested his bone marrow for symmetry. Each story more disturbing than the last. Each one drawing Ellis further into her labyrinth. His inbox was filled with horror stories. But one message stood out. Subject, you don't know the whole Serena. The sender was Rowan Halberd, 34, a trans-mass survivor from Quebec. Ellis vaguely remembered the name from an early Heartline upload. A blurry photo, minimal detail, unconfirmed. Rowan offered to meet. Said it was important. They met in a neutral space, quiet cafe, no cameras, no press. Rowan arrived in a worn hoodie, with a small scar down his jaw and a calmness Ellis didn't trust. You tracked her, Ellis said. Did you ever want revenge? Rowan shook his head. I wanted answers. I got them, and I moved on. You're saying she didn't hurt you? Oh, she did, Rowan said. I woke up missing things. Changed things. Same as you. But I also woke up. Not suicidal for the first time in years. Ellis's jaw tightened. That doesn't justify. I'm not justifying. I'm saying not everyone who went through her came out worse. Some of us, Rowan paused. Some of us found something we didn't know we needed. Ellis leaned forward. She didn't give you anything. She took. That's what she does. Rowan met his gaze evenly. Maybe. But for some of us, what she took was the part that wanted to die. Ellis sat back, stunned. He didn't respond. Couldn't. Rowan slid a folded photo across the table. It was him, Rowan, smiling with a child. Adopted. Happy. Scarred but whole. You get to tell your story, Ellis, Rowan said gently. But remember, Serena didn't just leave destruction behind. She left questions. He stood to leave. Before walking out, he turned back. Not every survivor hates their creator, but there was one file that changed everything. It came from Haiti, an old hard drive recovered from the Torch lab. It contained a folder labeled Ellis_Perm. Inside were journals, surgical sketches, voice memos Serena recorded late at night. She talked about him like he was her first success, her magnum opus, her bridge between genders. One recording played as Serena whispered, "He thinks I took something from him, but I gave him everything. He was never Daniel. Daniel was just scaffolding. Ellis is the structure. Stronger, softer, free." She paused, but the foundation's cracking. He's trying to rebuild something I already perfected. Another file contained a video, dated weeks before the trial. Serena, in a dark room, looking directly into the lens. You'll never stop looking for me, because you know I'm right. You just don't want to admit I made you better. Ellis slammed the laptop shut. He didn't sleep for 3 days. Not out of fear, but rage. She wasn't just running. She was taunting, playing with him from the shadows. And now he had a choice. Either keep running, or turn around, and face her again. Ellis booked the flight himself. No press, no lawyer, no cameras. Just a one-way ticket to Istanbul, where Serena was last seen entering a surgical conference under the name Dr. Vireo Lang, a name now blacklisted by Interpol but still whispered in corners of rogue medicine. He packed light, a burner phone, a flash drive with every file he had on her, a folded photo of himself, Daniel, before everything changed. Not for nostalgia, but as a reminder. He was no longer chasing justice. He was chasing closure. The conference was being held at a private venue near the Bosphorus, an opulent hotel repurposed into a wellness retreat, surrounded by mirrored windows and the scent of bergamot and antiseptic. Ellis entered wearing a donated press badge and a neutral gray blazer that didn't draw attention. His heart pounded like war drums in his chest, but his face stayed calm. He passed surgeons from Prague, Sao Paulo, Dubai, men and women sipping champagne and chatting casually about bone grafts and genital sculpting like it was high fashion. He spotted her instantly. Serena, standing in a group near the reflecting pool, hair tied in a low twist, wearing all white again. She looked untouched by time, ethereal, unbothered, until she saw him and smiled, not surprised, not shaken, just amused. She excused herself and walked toward him with slow, graceful steps. "You made it," she said softly. "I was wondering how long it would take." Ellis said nothing. She tilted her head. "Still don't talk much, huh? That's okay. I did all the talking for years." "Why?" he finally asked. "Why keep running?" Serena didn't blink. "I'm not running. I'm spreading." He stepped closer. "You hurt people. You broke them. I freed them," she whispered. "From shame. From lies. From the prisons they called bodies. You butchered them." She smiled faintly. "And yet they're still alive. More than they ever were." Ellis pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket. "This has enough evidence to bury you." Serena's eyes sparkled. "You think you're still in a courtroom?" He hesitated. She took a step forward. "There's no trial here. No jury. Just you. And me. And the version of you I helped unlock." "You didn't unlock me," he hissed. "You erased me." Serena's voice dropped into a whisper. "Then why are you still here?" He froze. Why was he here? Because of justice? Revenge? Or because somewhere deep inside, he needed to face the part of him she created? Serena stepped even closer. "You know what I see when I look at you now? Peace. Clarity. You walk differently. Breathe differently. You speak softer. Like the noise is finally gone." "You don't know me," he said. "I know the version of you that survived. And that version is mine." Something inside Ellis snapped. He grabbed her by the wrist and shoved the flash drive into her hand. "This is everything. Every file. Every victim. Send it wherever you want. Leak it. Burn it. I don't care." She blinked, thrown off. "Then why?" "Because I'm done playing your version of me." He stepped back. "I'm not Daniel. I'm not your masterpiece. I'm not your shadow." His voice trembled, but didn't break. "I'm Ellis. And I don't need revenge. I don't even need closure. I just need you to disappear." Serena stared at him. Something in her eyes, something cold and final, shifted. And then she nodded. No threats. No screams. Just a strange, eerie grace. As if she knew this was the end. That night, Ellis boarded a flight back to the States. The next morning, Serena Hart's name appeared in a data leak from an anonymous whistleblower. Hundreds of files. Photos, recordings, lab orders, surgery schedules. By afternoon, Interpol issued a new warrant, this time with the word terrorist included. But no one ever found her again. Not in Istanbul. Not in Berlin. Not in Lagos. It was like she'd walked into a mirror and shattered herself on the way out. Back in Montana, Ellis returned to his quiet cabin. The air was cold, the sky sharp with stars. He made tea, sat on the porch, held the old photo of Daniel for the last time, and then tossed it into the fire. It curled, blackened, disappeared, and for the first time in years, Ellis didn't feel grief. He didn't feel rage. He felt room, like the shell had finally cracked open. And what came next, whatever came next, wouldn't belong to Serena. Wouldn't belong to the past. It would belong to him, whoever he chose to be. A week later, Ellis received a package. No return address. Just a simple brown box on his cabin porch. Inside, a surgical scalpel, a neatly folded lab coat, a printed note that read, "You burned her body, but you forgot to bury the idea. We're still here, and we're still building." Attached was a Polaroid. It showed a basement. Clean. Clinical. On the table, a young man, smiling through tears, hooked up to IVs. And behind him stood a new woman. White scrubs, tight bun, black latex gloves, face obscured. But beneath the mask, the eyes were unmistakable. Not Serena, but someone who believed in her. Ellis dropped the photo, staggered backward, because now he understood. Serena didn't just mutilate bodies. She planted ideology. And now, somewhere in the world, her blueprint was being followed. By someone younger, harsher, maybe even more fanatical. He looked out the window. The woods were silent. But the silence no longer felt safe. It felt like breath. Holding. That winter, the snow came early. The mountains outside Ellis's cabin were buried in silence and white, and the nights stretched longer than he remembered. He was used to solitude by now, used to the wind and the creaking wood and the distant sound of nothing. But on the third night of December, just after 2 a.m., someone knocked on his door. 3 times. Slow. Measured. Ellis froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not Mika. Not Carmen. Not the trauma group from Missoula. He opened the door cautiously, heart pounding. And there she was. A young woman, early 20s, shaved head, pale lips, wide green eyes. She wore a surgical smock under a heavy coat. Her voice was soft, barely more than breath. She said, "You might help me." Ellis stared. She looked nothing like Serena. And yet, everything in her posture, her eyes, the strange tilt of her smile, it was familiar. Too familiar. Ellis didn't speak. He stepped back, slammed the door, locked every bolt. Then he sat on the floor in the dark, chest heaving, watching the shadows stretch across the room. The knocking didn't return. When he finally looked out the window at dawn, the snow was untouched. No footprints. No woman. No trace. Just the cold and the quiet and the creeping thought. Maybe Serena was never just a person. Maybe she was an idea, and ideas don't die.